excited to have our dear friend Mitali Paul on the show. She is Department Administrator of Surgery at Houston Methodist and adjunct faculty at Texas Women's University. How do you do it all, Mitali? I'm so proud of you. We're going to talk, today's topic is about women in leadership roles, and you are a role model for us. So,
thank you.
What is the current state of women in leadership?
So, believe it or not, it's been only 100 years since we celebrated the first International Women's Day. And as you know, in the U.S., 1920 was the first time that women were allowed to vote. Yes. So we've been on this journey of being, having or seeing more women in leadership for many, many years. But in some ways, it feels the progress is not enough. When you think about it, 50% of the world population is women, right? Mm-hmm. So, but then when you look at representation of women in leadership roles across industries across the world, less than 30% of women are in official, political offices, right. Basically. When you look at academic leadership, again, but then when you, so only about 25% right. women that are CEOs of companies. Okay. And then when you start looking at, when you go down the pipeline, and we're talking about CEOs, right? So when you go down the pipeline, if you were to look at women of color, mm-hmm. it goes down to 1 in 16. So not only is it obviously underrepresentation of women in general, right. when you really start looking at the intersectionality, and when you look at women of color, there's just still so much more underrepresentation. And then the pay disparity right. still exists, believe it or not. So in 2022, if you look at the U.S. Bureau of Statistics, for every dollar that a man made, women are still making 84 cents. Oh. Okay? And a black woman makes 63 cents to a dollar. Oh. Think about that. Yeah. The same work that she's putting in, that a white male counterpart is putting in, the man makes $1, the black woman makes 63 cents, and any other woman makes 84 cents. And so that's why it's important, right? I mean, when you think about it, all of the decisions that are being made, whether it's in companies, in organizations, in government, mm-hmm. when we have such low representation of women, but it's men that are actually making decisions for us. And when I say for us, I mean, it's not about man versus woman. We all know that when you empower women, mm-hmm. when you have women in leadership positions, you're going to have more well-balanced decision making. There's mm-hmm. going to be representation at the table. Right. And society benefits from it. It's not just about, we want more women in power. Exactly. It's not a feminist thing. It's not about ego. Society in general is going to be better off when you have women making decisions. I mean, think about, all the decisions that are being made about, parental leave, mm-hmm. about women's reproductive rights, abortions, a lot of conversation that's happening right now. A lot of the decisions are being made by men at the table and not women. And this impacts society. It impacts our kids. It impacts future generations. So when you ask me, what is the state of women in leadership? We've made a lot of progress, but there's just so much more work to be done.
Oh, wow. So why do we need women in leadership?
Part of it is, when you look at scientific research, when you look at leadership traits, 7 out of 8 very key critical leadership traits that are important to be good leaders, women actually rank higher compared to men. Oh. when it comes to resilience, when it comes to collaboration, when it comes to working with other people. Women are actually more transformational leaders. Men tend to be really good at transactional leadership, getting things done, being assertive, getting things done. But if you're thinking about vision and if you're thinking about transformation, then women are proven to be better leaders. So obviously, there's, when you look at the top performing companies across the U.S. or across the world, you see the financial metrics tie in where you have more women in leadership positions, or even companies that have women CEOs, they perform better in the market. And you can see a direct correlation between where you have women representation or companies that are investing in growing women, you have a succession planning, you have a pipeline of executives or people that are being developed across the board, and you see those companies perform better. They have better financial results, they have higher employee engagement, and so, it's not, again, it's pretty well established and proven that the more women you have within your organization, the better the company is going to perform. So it's important. And then as we talked about it, it's important for women to be able to be at the table where decisions are being made. The decisions that are impacting work, that are impacting life, that are impacting society, that are impacting, healthcare, that's impacting so many aspects of all of our lives. Women bring a well-rounded approach. You're bringing diversity of thought, you're bringing innovative thinking, you're bringing resilience, because we are naturally geared, just when you look at the biology of a man and a woman, it's for the man, it's the hunter, the gatherer, the provider, right? And for a woman, it's the nurturer. And that's why you see, when it comes to emotional intelligence, women tend to have higher level of emotional intelligence, because by nature we were geared to be caregivers, right? And so it's really important to understand that you're not doing this just to benefit women, you're doing this to show better results, to have better results, for companies to be more successful, for countries to be more successful. When you look across the globe, the countries that have actually, shown significant economic development are the ones that have invested in women's education, taking care of the girl child, making sure that they have opportunities for development. And it's directly correlated to, if girls do better, women do better, the country does better in general. So you really that's why you need representation. That's why you need more women in leadership roles and leadership positions, because they're able to make contributions, valuable contributions that maybe a man could not potentially bring in. So
okay. And then what can organizations do to reduce gender disparity?
So there is a lot of talk about diversity. There's a lot of talk about inclusion, and you think about what are the barriers for advancement? And I think starting with that is the most important. Whether it's a big organization or a small organization, doesn't matter if, the size of it. What's important is to understand what are the barriers for advancement. Especially during COVID, the pandemic really, really impacted women in the workplace because of childcare issues and caregiving issues. I think we saw in the U.S., we saw the greatest drop of women in the workplace in decades. So think about that. We're still a few years out of the pandemic. We're still trying to recover from it. So as is, we lost a lot of women from the workforce, right? So that itself is, we're starting again, we took a few steps behind, right? So we're having to now start again to re-recruit these women back into the workplace. And sometimes that's hard. So think about it. I mean, anytime you interview someone, you see a gap on someone's resume, right? And you're trying to reintegrate into the job market. The market is so competitive that if someone took time off to take care for an aging family member or a sick child or what have you, or because they had to homeschool their kids, are we going to look at them the same way as someone that has continued to work throughout? Maybe not, because you're thinking your skills are outdated, and things are changing so much, technology is changing so much. So the biggest thing is, how do we have programs in place to be able to actually, separate that noise and be able to give people credit for the time? I mean, I really enjoy career coaching and, helping mentor people. And oftentimes I'll have individuals that'll reach out to me, and they've been a homemaker for many, many years. And now that the kids are all grown up, they're like, I want to, because I have a college degree, I have a master's, I set it aside because I had aging parents and then I had kids. And now 10 years later, they're trying to get back into the workforce and they're struggling, right? But then, and I've even told people, like, put professional mother on your resume, right? Because, I mean, you're serving on PTOs, you're doing a lot of organizational things. I mean, because none of these mothers are just sitting at home. They are actively managing, they're volunteering in different organizations. And I feel all of that are skills that you have that are transferable skills, right? So it's very, very important to be able for companies to recognize, that pipeline, that recruitment itself. We have to have policies to be able to take, those into consideration. And then, you've got to look at what are the advancement barriers. We've all heard about the glass ceiling, right? I was reading up and I heard about this new concept. It's called the missing rung. And I was like, what is that? So the missing rung, so the glass ceiling is when you feel like, you can't get promoted past a point because people just don't see you at an executive level. And it happens more often to women than to men, right? The other thing is, and there's actually studies to show that if there is a position that's open, the man, even if he meets 60% of the competencies or the experience requirements for the job, will apply for the position. But the woman will not apply even if it's 90%. They're going to read in between the lines and read every single qualification, and unless they meet every single and hit every single quality, they're not even going to put their name in the hat or apply for the job, right? So we ourselves are barriers in the first place, right? That you call it imposter syndrome, you call it different things. And then the missing rung is right at that first management position, right? What they're saying is a man or a male applicant is 70% more likely to get that first management job than a woman, right? So you have a pool of candidates and they're, it's a first level, entry level job. And it's a first entry level management job, your first management job. And because of numerous things, one, the woman may not even apply for it. They may not come off as assertive or confident enough to be able to manage other people. There may be microaggressions in the workplace where the person who is making the hiring decision is a man and is potentially looking for those male characteristics or qualities and doesn't consider the woman for that position. The man is 70%, the male applicant is 70% more likely to get that first management position. So that's the missing rung concept. So think about it. If that first job itself, that first job is so important. And I still remember my first management role. Somebody actually had applied for the position and never heard from HR. And then I went and got in contact with the hiring director for that. And it was my first management role. And I had not managed people directly or managed finances directly, a budget. And the job kind of needed both, but it wasn't a requirement, but it was, preferred. And I never made it through HR's, screening or what have you. But because I reached out to the director who was hiring, and I put myself on his calendar and went and talked, and I managed to get the role. I managed to be in the play. I was competitive, and I managed to get the role. But I had to really put myself out there, right? And think about it. How many people actually do that?
How many women?
Yeah. Right?
Yeah.
And so when you think about it, that missing rung is so hard, because if right at the beginning your chances are 30% to make it to that first management role, think about how much harder it gets into leadership positions. So these are things that companies, again, need to recognize and have. And there are some really, Memora Herman has had a Women's Leadership Institute, and they've had it for many, many years. And, they have a lot of programs and a lot of development in terms of developing women in executive positions and into leadership positions. When you look at MD Anderson, they have programs where every leader, director or above, gets a coach. When you land a director position, because they have a leadership institute as well. And so every person that gets hired at a director or above level gets an executive coach to help them in the first 6 months, right? To help them assimilate, to be successful, to really develop their leadership skills. So there's, and these are healthcare examples. Obviously, when you look at, Lean In, the organization has done tons of work with different companies. So there's a lot of different things that you can do, is to understand what is the company culture, what are the barriers to advancement, is there implicit bias, and how do you do away with that? Are there training programs? And then mentorship and sponsorship, right? More importantly, sponsorship. Anyone can be a mentor and give you advice, but the sponsor is the one that's actually taking your room. There's actually a quote that says, a sponsor is someone that takes your name in a room full of opportunities, right? Someone that is opening doors for you, someone that's actually not just giving you advice or, but opening doors and finding opportunities for you. You can have official mentorship programs. Different professional organizations that are, trained and are committed to being mentors, and then have sponsorship programs where you invest in women's, education, send them to conferences, help them, get college degrees or what have you, but also help them develop their soft skills and be able to present, and most importantly, I feel like as women, we need to be able to advocate for each other. We need to be able to support and pull other people up, right? And we just get so busy with our own struggles and then trying to balance everything else that we have that, that takes the backstage. I know a lot of women that are very, very passionate about developing other women, but don't get around to actually doing much of it. And I think that's very, very important, is to advocate for each other, advocate for others, and, always try to pay it forward, be able to help and mentor and guide people. And if you figured something that works for you, share that with someone else.
And I think as women, we are, I don't know if it's, especially South Asian women, we are kind of raised in a way where, the confidence is not there. That's what I feel, right? Because we have so many responsibilities, like taking care of the household, like somehow the man takes, is the money maker, provider, and like women is the nurturer. So she's taking care of everything else. And when that opportunity comes to go in a management position, it's kind of, you always, like, that's at least happened with me. You take a step back because you're like, okay, that's fine. I'll just take care of the house, and even though you are you're
capable
of
yes
it, right?
Yes.
So
and I think that's where the work-life balance also comes in, right? Having companies that recognize that and offer the flexibility. Houston Methodist actually at the Med Center has a childcare facility,
Oh,
believe it or not,
interesting.
right?
Wow.
And that happened because our CEO is a woman and understands, right? And then the other facility that also had a childcare was the Woodlands facility, which again was the CEO, Deb Sukin, and Roberta Schwartz. And these are role models that I look onto. These are, they are healthcare industry stalwarts, leaders. Debbie is now the president of Texas Children's Hospital. And so, these are women that had children with special needs that really, really understand.
Yeah.
And they are, role models because they're paving the way. They are in an industry.
Exactly. They actually took steps.
And we lose money, and it is a very, very tough business. Childcare is not a business to be in, but realizing that a big part of healthcare workforce is women, right?
Yes.
Most of our nurses are women, healthcare providers, even a lot of our physicians. Some of my surgeons used the childcare facility when they had, babies, and they knew they were right across, in the same organization, and they could go in and see check on the child or what have you. And, so think about it. As a hospital, we decided to have that because we recognize that women are going to be able to, women are going to have the challenge of childcare. So having those kinds of opportunities, or companies realizing that they can have that flexible scheduling.
But that's because the woman was a CEO.
Exactly.
Right?
And that again brings us back to why do we need women in leadership positions? Because you're thinking about that. You're thinking about, during COVID, we as employees, we actually got a care allowance if you had elderly parents that were actually helping with childcare. Then the company paid us to take care of, to support them. So there's, when you think about those benefits, and that's why the organization is the top health system in Texas and, amongst the top in the country, is because these decisions are being thought through. They're thoughtful. And that's where, you and I were talking about your experience at Sugarland as a patient. When you pay attention to the needs of your workforce, and your employees are happy and committed, you're going to see that difference in the care that you receive as a patient, because we want to give back as employees, right?
Yeah, and I'm going to give kudos to Sugarland Methodist. Like I was telling Mitali, from the time you enter, like you said, the respect, the passion, the care that they give, every person, and there were different nurses that I had, and the doctors, of course, amazing. I love her. But it was amazing, and that's an understatement, So that's what I was asking Mitali, what's the secret? Because every time I've gone to Methodist, they have lived up to the mark, or they somehow go above, So yes,
that's excellent to hear. And again, you take care of your people, and people are going to take care of patients, right? And happy people make for happy patients. So.
So. What are the key differences? Or we'll go to the next question after the break. We'll take a quick break and then we'll be back. Yes.
All right.
Welcome back to Chai Time on 103.5 Hum FM. We're in conversation with Mitali, and it's a very interesting and eye-opening conversation. So, what are the key differences between men and women leadership style?
So there's actually a male leadership style and a female leadership style, and it doesn't have to be gender related. It's really qualities or characteristics that go with each of the leadership styles. And obviously gender, kind of plays a role but at the same time, you could be a woman leader, but still demonstrate, male leadership characteristics. But there is very clearly defined, male leadership characteristics and female leadership characteristics. So when you talk about female leadership, empathy, and emotional intelligence are two really key components. Usually, again, it could be a man that demonstrates, these qualities or characteristics, but they are usually associated with a female leadership style. A lot of collaboration, it's not my way or the highway. Women leaderships or women leaders tend to be much more collaborative. They want to have, buy-in with different people. They're, and somewhat a little less assertive than men, which leads to more collaboration because it's not, this is how we're going to do it, but it's really taking into account everyone's perspective and trying to find a middle ground or trying to find something that actually works for everyone. The third characteristic is communication. Women are in general better communicators just because, that empathy factor comes into play. We tend to empathize more. We tend to be more expressive in terms of communicating. And so that really helps. That brings us to our fourth characteristic is that relationships building aspect. We're more people focused, and women tend to really take into account how other people are feeling. There's again that emotional intelligence piece of it. So we're more collaborative. We want to make sure that we're bringing people along, and that's why women leaders make better are transformational leaders, because they're influencing, they're building deeper connections, they're building deeper relationships, and they're able to take people to that next level, take the company to that next level, and transform the culture. And then, women tend to be a lot more inclusive in their decision making. And I guess it comes from also a place where you don't feel very included, and so you are even more cognizant of that when you're making decisions to make sure you're including everyone. And because of our personal experiences, we make sure that other people are being listened to. We tend to be better active listeners. There's actually research that supports that women get interrupted more times than men do when they're talking in either meetings or anywhere else. And I think that also comes, and that's actually a form of microaggression, because you're not giving the woman the due respect that they deserve. And it just tends to be that a man will interrupt a woman more times, but women tend to be better active listeners and are more respectful in that aspect. And so since women are better listeners, you're seen as being more inclusive, because you're allowing people to share their feelings, you're being more collaborative, and you're trying to, listen to more wider perspectives. Women are also more innovative. And that's, again, a lot of it comes from just biologically how we are made differently. We tend to, men are fixers, right? And women will come around with workarounds. Something happens, you always have a workaround for it, right? And so we improvise, right? And we do that in our personal lives all the time, and we carry those same characteristics into work, because then we're able to be more innovative and think outside the box and not be just limited. And we've talked about relationships. Now, when you talk about male leadership, the key characteristics for male leadership are assertiveness and confidence. And as we've kind of alluded to it and talked about it, men tend to be a lot more confident and a lot more assertive. So sometimes on the flip side of that is that they tend to come across as more transactional. How many times have you gone to a male boss and talked about something and felt like they weren't empathetic, or they weren't listening, or they just didn't get it, right? And that happens because, again, they may be an excellent leader, they may be, but they're just style of, maybe they interrupted you, they didn't realize, and they interrupted you, and you're thinking, nobody wants to hear my point or what have you. And so that assertiveness and confidence, on the flip side, can come in the way of building deeper connections and relationships. And so men they're more transactional leaders. If there's a problem, the building's on fire, you probably want the man in there, taking care of it than the woman who's going to get emotional about the fire. But so, obviously both have their strengths and, their opportunities, but men tend to be more problem solvers and fixers, and they're more strategic thinkers. They're, and even at the cost of other people's emotions, if something needs to get done, it's going to get done, right? They tend to take bigger risks, right? And so there are, again, certain industries where, probably men leaders will do better because you need people to take bigger risks, right? But then there are certain industries where you want that people side where it's more heavy. So it's important to kind of understand these differences and understand these characteristics, because not every opportunity someone's going to be successful in as a leader. And that's where finding that match or finding that fit to say, these characteristics are what we need in a leader for this type of an organization, for this type of a culture, right? Then you have decisiveness. Men tend to be a lot more decisive. And I think it comes with, women trying to be collaborators, where sometimes that can become seen as indecisive. And it's not that you're indecisive, you're waiting to get feedback from multiple people. You're trying to be more inclusive of including different perspectives. And so your decision making may be a little slower because you're trying to do that. You're trying to be intentional in making your decisions. But men, they may make that decision and that's it. So they're seen as more decisive. And then they tend to be, if that assertiveness comes across in their communication too. So, when you think about charisma, a lot of times, when you imagine someone that's a charismatic leader, it tends to be more the men than women. One is part of it is you have lesser representation of women in leadership roles. So even if you think about role models, that's why it's important to have role models, right? Because when you're thinking about a leader, 9 times out of 10, you're going to think about a man rather than a woman because there's lesser representation. But that charisma comes from that confidence. And when we second guess ourselves as women and we tend to have, and you made a big point about, humility. As South Asians, whether men or women, we are raised to be very, very humble. We're raised to be, put your head down, do your work, and, things are going to happen or what have you. We don't tend to self-promote. We don't tend to really put ourselves out there, because that's kind of how our parents were, how their parents were, and and it's a struggle that our kids kind of face, because where is that fine line between being arrogant and assertive? Exactly. Right? It's that fine line. And it's so much harder for women because you get labeled. If you're too assertive, you get labeled to be aggressive. You get labeled with other words, which I'm not going to say here. But that is so true, right? A man could be doing the exact same thing, and people are going to say, wow, look at how confident he is. But a woman will be considered aggressive for doing the exact same thing. And those are the kind of the societal pressures, the norms, the microaggressions that exist in society, that again also holds us back, right? Because even though at work, you need that assertion, you need that confidence when you're making multi-million-dollar decisions, right? And you're responsible for hundreds of people. You have to feel confident and you have to be able to make decisions. And women are doing that in all of these leadership roles. So why is it that, we struggle with it? It's because it's ingrained in us and we're kind of raised to be a certain way or look a certain way or say certain things. And, and then the pay disparity doesn't help either, right? With our confidence, because if you know that your counterpart is making,
Way
what,
more.
18 cents or 16 cents more for the work that you're doing, where's going to be the motivation for you to continue to do what you're doing? Plus manage everything else that you've got to do. Right?
Yeah.
And then get labeled as being too aggressive.
Yes.
Because you're assertive and confident. So there's all of these underlying things that we've got to obviously recognize as a society and address before we get to where we can have more women, taking on leadership roles. And I think that's the important, is having the right role models and being able to advocate for each other and being able to really recognize that these are kind of the barriers that hold us back. And how do we, as women, and then how do we find men to be sponsors, and for men that are already in leadership positions to open those doors for women and recognize that it's important to have that well-balanced team, to have more women in leadership roles for their companies to perform better, for society to do better, for us as a country to do better.
Yeah.
Right?
But I have a question for you. So what, like you were saying in your interview, you actually reached out and you put yourself out there. So what made you do that? Because you are all, like, is it like your upbringing or some switch that happened, because I think as women, especially South, we're more like, we'll see what happens, right? Like, I'm going to reach out only a certain amount of time, or,
Yeah.
So, like, what happened for you?
I think it's a combination of things.
Okay.
One, I've always been very ambitious and very driven by myself.
Okay.
Also, part of it is upbringing. So I grew up in India and grew up with very limited means.
Yeah.
And, my dad passed away when I was 18 and kind of at a critical point where I was trying to figure out what to do with my life. And so my siblings and we didn't really have a safety net.
Yeah.
My brother was just 11 years old when my dad passed away, right? And my mom was a physician, so she was always working. And so I had a good role model, right? Because I had a mom who was working and supporting the family when my dad went through some difficult times and he lost his job, and there was, she was kind of the breadwinner for the family. So obviously part of that was just me being able to see. So I never saw myself as a woman or a girl, right? I was an individual and I had to survive and I had to do what I had to do. And I think my dad also, like, he always wanted a son, because that was kind of like the typical Indian thing, but we were never limited. Like my sister or I we went to the best schools, even though we couldn't afford, great clothes or, going out to eat or going out on vacation. They put all of their savings into the best education, right? So opportunities were there. And then because I didn't have a safety net, like, failure was not an option for me, right? So when I came here, I was on a student visa. If I didn't get a job, I would have to go back to India, right?
Yeah.
So I was the first international student at my graduate healthcare administration program to actually get a visa sponsorship and get into an administrative fellowship at MD Anderson.
That's amazing.
And, a lot of it is just, I'm very, very grateful, right, for the opportunities and for the people that supported me. But for me, just failure was never an option, because, like, if I failed, that means I had to start from ground up, go back to India. And so I had to keep growing and putting myself out there and then just giving it my best and, giving it my all, really. And so I think, that sometimes I feel like not having that safety net was there because it was scary. It was scary, like, and what do you do if you don't succeed?
Right.
And you have, I was still trying to support my brother, my mom, and we all kind of supported each other through it. So, I had bills to pay. I had responsibilities. And so, it just was like, you give it your all and then see what happens. Because at least at the end of the day, I knew that I gave it my everything. And then whatever happens, happens. But I did not want to leave a job or an interview, and I worked incessantly. And part of it, you were asking me, how do I do what I do now, is because I've done it all my life. I've always worked long hours and work like I enjoy. It's my passion.
I can see that.
And so it doesn't feel exhausting or it doesn't feel, and that's why it's so important to find things that you enjoy, right? And find a job that you're passionate about, because then it doesn't feel like work. Like, yes, are there days when I'm like, oh my God, I want to kill someone right now? Of course, right? But for the most part, I think it's that drive and it's that passion and wanting to give back too that keeps me going. But I think the biggest thing really for me was just not having that safety net and knowing that I just couldn't fail. There really wasn't an option to fail, and it was me, and people were counting on me.
Right.
So
that's amazing. And then we're almost at the end of the show, but what advice would you give for women who are looking for jobs in management, or what changes you think women need to make?
I think most importantly is just put your name in the hat, right? Yeah. And I think that's the first step, because if you don't even do that, where do you start?
Yes.
And that's where, reach out, find mentors, find sponsors, keep your skills up to date, and always, be willing to take risks. I've taken a lot of risks in my personal and my professional life. And, sometimes now, the older and wiser me looks back and thinks, what the hell was I thinking, right? Even with some of the personal decisions and some of the personal choices I made, I took risks. I took a lot of risks in my life. But it was also because I had that drive, and it was like, if I don't do this, I don't have a backup option. So sometimes I feel like, now, of course, I always tell people have a plan B. But a lot of times, I had a plan A and a plan B and a plan C. I'm a planner. But I gave my plan A so much, like 120%, that I didn't even think. Like, I had a plan B, but I wasn't going to think about plan B until plan A had failed, right? And sometimes when you have lots of options, you don't give that one option your entire focus, right? And so I think that's important, is that, yes, be methodical, be intentional, and have options, but then, go after it with everything you've got. And it's okay to be rejected. It's perfectly fine. And, even though your ego gets hurt when you put your name in the hat for something and you don't get that or what have you, but you always, like, when I look back, every time that something didn't work out, something different or something better was there around the corner. But when you're going through it, you don't realize it, right? And so that fear of rejection shouldn't hold you back. And I think a lot of times we as women overthink and overanalyze, and because that, yes, exactly. And I think that that's where, that lack of confidence and assertiveness, or that imposter syndrome kicks in. So put yourself out there. And there are so many people that want to help. It's just asking for help and saying, hey, what do you think? What advice do you have? And really be okay with, or be comfortable with, asking for help. And then, I would say the last few years of my career, I've actually, been assertive enough to even name a number. When I got a job offer, I said, no, this is what I want. And I was told, I don't think that's going to happen. But then they came back and I got it, and I had been grossly underpaid for, the beginning part of my career. And because it was, I was an immigrant, I was on a visa, I was just grateful to have a job, I'm like, I will work for free if you let me,
I need the sponsors.
Exactly. But, as I've grown in my career, I've realized that if you don't speak up for yourself, nobody else is going to.
Yeah.
And at the most, they're going to say no,
Yeah.
right?
But you
and
have to ask.
if you don't
You have
ask,
to ask.
you're not going to get it.
But that's
right?
because now you've been confident, but now you know what you put in yourself and you know your worth, so you're okay to ask or get rejected. So that's amazing. Thank you, Mitali. You're such an inspiration. This was a great topic, and especially conversing with you because you always have such good ideas, and you yourself in your personal life are always inspiring us. So
thank you so much.
Thank you so much for coming on the show, and thank you, our listeners. Have a great week, and we'll see you next Monday, same time, same place. Bye bye.